This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning and welcome. I am Nick Boke, for those who don't know. I've been here coming off and on for a number of years now. We live in Vermont, and so my wife Buffy, who is here with me, and I have decided to make this an event. So rather than driving 3 hours and 42 minutes to come down here and preach, and then 3 hours and 42 minutes back, unless it's a snow time. So there are all those people going up to ski, making it about 4 hours and 80 minutes. We've decided each time we stay someplace around here. We stayed at the Sonesta in Middletown last night, had a nice dinner, and walked very coldly along the wharf for a little bit in Newport. I just want to say, before I say anything else, that Nancy is so clever. When she saw I was going to be talking about art and religion, she pulled out her book of art and music. And so if the introductory piece, the prelude, sounded a little bit like sort of a recital, it was, because it was by a painting by Renoir called Young Girls at the Piano. And who was the composer?
The composer was a contemporary composer named Catherine Rollin.
Okay.
If anyone was curious about the actual pictures, and you want to look at them later, the actual pictures that these pieces are written for, in the middle.
If those of you on Zoom can't hear, she said you can come look at the pictures later, but you can't because you're not here. So you'll have to send her an email or something like that. There will be several others though, and I will try to, well, I'll say them now because I might forget later. The musical selection that will be played after the announcement is about Botticelli's Spring, which you all know. And then for the offertory, it's a piece describing Seurat's painting Circus, and then we will end with Rousseau's Snake Charmer after the closing words. Come into this place of peace and let silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history form your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its wisdom change your heart. And can we join together now in hymn number 76? Hymn number 76 is For the Flowers That Bloom About Our Feet. And can we all join together now in the affirmation, number 471 in the gray hymnal. Love is the doctrine of the church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the God. Thus do we covenant with each other. Now, if there are any announcements, I don't remember, Donald, how if an announcement comes by Zoom, do you read it or? But so none by Zoom then. Okay. Are there any announcements, please? Yes, sir. David.
Ongoing announcement about Course in Miracles. Every Friday at 11 a.m. Our co-conspirators are learning to go. Now where do you go? He's out of the car. He's getting his car. And David Black will be online Wednesday. We are continuing to be in about 28 countries around the world on our Zoom. And so we please continue that.
Other announcements? Yes, ma'am. Kit.
Morning, and thank you so much, Nick, for joining us again. We look forward to seeing you again in May. So it's my job to let us know who's next week. Richard Trudeau will be our guest minister next week. And also, let me tell you that on the 10th, that's the first month of April, on the 10th of April is Paul's prayer will be here. I haven't seen him in a year or so. I've only seen him once this year, so I kind of need to come and wish him well and participate in the service. But the reason I tell you that is because I will not be here next week.
Other announcements? The next musical selection is a portrayal of Botticelli's Spring. By whom? Do you have that in front of you? Catherine Rollins? Okay, thank you. Would make Vivaldi proud. I'm going to be talking about art and religion in a very personal way. The readings are, I almost always have one from the Old Testament, one or New Testament, one from another religious tradition, and then something else. This time, none are from any of those sacred books, although I make reference to them in the sermon itself. But I hope we can go back and think about art in the same sort of way that trying to put the painting to music does, where it brings things together and helps us look beneath the surface of what any work of art is dealing with. The first reading is from Gordon Childe. He's a British historian. His book called What Happened in History. In Upper Paleolithic France, in the deep recesses of limestone caverns, perhaps 2 miles beneath the earth, the impenetrable gloom, lit only by the feeble flame of fat burning in a stone lamp with a moss wick, and often on rock surfaces accessible only by standing on a helper's shoulders, artist magicians painted or engraved the rhinoceros, mammoth, bison, reindeer that they must eat. As sure as a pictured bison was conjured up on the cave wall by the master's skillful strokes, so surely would a real bison emerge for his associates to kill and eat. The beasts are always highly individualized, actual portraits, not abstract shorthand symbols, very like portraits of dead beasts. The second reading is from Friedrich Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. The god Dionysus, the proper stage hero and focus of vision, is not at first actually present in the oldest period of tragedy, but is only imagined as present so that in the earliest Greek tragedy, there is only the chorus and not drama. Later on, the attempt is made to exhibit the god as real and to display the visionary creature together with its glorifying encirclement. It is here that the drama, in the narrow sense of the term, begins. To the chanting chorus is now assigned the task of exciting the hearers to such a pitch of Dionysiac frenzy that when the tragic hero appears on the stage, they do not behold in him, say, the unshapely masked man, but a visionary figure, born as it was of their own ecstasy. And finally, a relatively recent poem by the American poet Amy Clampitt. It's called Beethoven's 111. It's a poem about Clampitt's father, who did battle with the elements in the American prairie. An upright Steinway piano in his rustic living room and prints of 18th century paintings on living room walls as he tries to survive in that newly settled part of the prairie. This is a selection from near the end. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, rendered with a dying fall, the chords subside, disintegrate, regroup in climbing sequences con brio. But there's no dwelling on the sweet past here, there being no past to speak of other than the setbacks, typhoid in the wells, half the first settlers dead of it before the year was out, diphtheria and scarlet fever every winter, drought, the depression, a mortgage on the mortgage. High art to him as a whisper, the silk and perfume of unsullied hands. Those hands driving the impressionable wild with anguish for another life entirely, the Lyceum Circle, the doomed diving bell of art. Beethoven shut up with the four walls of his deafness, rehearsing the unbearable semplice e cantibile, somehow reconstituting the blister shirt of the intolerable into this music. A hurrying into flowering among the fence rows. Dying for my father came to be like that finally. In its messages, the levitation of serenity, as though the spirit might aspire in its last act to walk on air. Now, because the person who sent this information to get it put into your order of service is a bit of an idiot, the responsive reading is number 577. Number 577 is appropriately, given the world we're living in these days, it is possible to live in peace. Would you read it to yourselves, please, to make sure you want to read it aloud? 577. If someone with courage and vision can rise to lead in nonviolent action, the winter of despair can, in the twinkling of an eye, be turned into the summer of hope. Nonviolence is not a garment to put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our being. Nonviolence, which is a quality of the heart, cannot come by an appeal to the brain. It is a plant of slow growth, growing imperceptibly but surely. If a single person achieves the highest kind of love, it will be sufficient to neutralize the hate of millions. If we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. The future depends on what we do in the present. Before we take a few moments of silence, I'd just like to think about the irony that we're facing now, because we probably all agree with what was just said by Mohandas Gandhi. On the other hand, we are probably all cheering on those brave Ukrainians who are having to kill people to save their lives, their families, their homeland, their culture. Irony. Nothing's simple. Take a few moments. And can we join together now in hymn number 288? 288 is All Our Architects. I think this is one that I've periodically tried in a variety of venues. I don't think it's ever worked very well, but we'll see how it goes today. Well, I don't know what the matter is with all those other people. That was fine. Thank you. You never know. I was inspired to write this sermon as I sat reading and listening to music in our living room one very cold, late winter morning. I had picked up Gordon Child's What Happened in History after seeing how frequently this book had been cited in Colin Renfrew's book, Prehistory, The Making of the Human Mind. I had read Child in 1942. In Child's 1942 book in 1970, not that old, as I prepared to teach a course in ancient history. And sitting that cold morning in that chair in Vermont, I remembered what an impact it had had on my thinking half a century before. As I read, quote, perhaps 2 miles beneath the earth, the impenetrable gloom only by the feeble flame of fat burning in a stone lamp with a moss wick, and often on rock surfaces accessible only by standing on a helper's shoulders, artist magicians painted or engraved the rhinoceros, mammoth, bison, reindeer that they must eat. I reread this morning and misplaced a page. No, I didn't. I'm taking my time, not panicking about having lost a page. I wondered what was going on in my living room at that moment as I read that from that book. How connected the world my wife and I had made for ourselves was, how connected it was to the one I was reading about. Visually, our living room is adorned with 12 oil and watercolor paintings, 2 large black and white photographs, 1 engraving of a church in London, and an intricate piece of Arabic script which reads in a circle, maktub, which means it is written. The paintings are mostly landscapes and still lifes, although there are 3 abstract pieces that hint of horizons. One photograph is of 3 ballerinas posing atop the cliff in western Beirut that looks out on 200-foot tall monoliths rising from the Mediterranean Sea, set against the brilliance of the setting sun beyond. The other photograph is a 1930s Works Progress Administration photo of a farmer, probably a sharecropper, wearing patched and repatched shirt and overalls, holding what seems to be a hoe, only his torso showing, faceless, as though to say, this is every man. This is all of us. I often look up from whatever I'm reading to contemplate these works of art in the morning, sometimes looking intensely at 1 or 2, sometimes hopping from piece to piece. While all this goes on, I'm usually listening to music. This morning, it was a Mozart quintet on a record that I had bought in 1966 when I was just becoming interested in classical music. For my reading, I usually read nonfiction, like What Happened in History, but I also read poetry from time to time. This morning, the 1985 Breadloaf Anthology of Contemporary American Poetry lies at the top of the stack from which I had picked Gordon Child's book. It's dog-eared with pages of the poems that I often reread, equally often wondering why they had struck me as being so important when I read them last year or a decade ago or more. But this morning, it's Gordon Child's reference to artists, magicians, I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about this as I look around at the works of art that hang on our walls and listen to the Mozart quintet and think about the poems that I read and reread. I think, in short, about the relationship between what the earliest of human artists, whether they were poets or storytellers or painters or sculptors or the first musicians playing that 40,000-year-old five-fingered flute, which was discovered in a cave in the Swabian Alps, along with figurines of mammoths and rhinoceroses and what is known as the Venus of Hohlefels, which was, Michael Spitzer tells us in his book, The Musical Human, the oldest undisputed representation of a woman. I sit there wondering just what relationship the art on my walls, the music that comes to my ears from the record on the turntable we got from my mother, or from the words packed into the bread loaf anthology lying next to me, what they have to do with those cave paintings and the paintings of Sumerian and Egyptian tombs, all the way up to Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling and the Gregorian chants that were sung until just a bit before he stood high on that scaffold to paint his God, reaching out to touch Adam's finger. Having developed the image that he painted from one of those stories told 3 millennia ago that became the stories of the Old Testament, the part that has been immortalized as, so God created man in his own image, male and female created he them, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. And so on. And so Michelangelo painted God creating a man with Eve watching and waiting, sort of tucked under God's arm. These biblical words are not words I was raised with, coming as I did from a very secular household. But they were words I studied at some length in the course I took in as a college sophomore called The Bible as Literature. As literature, as story, as art, not as divine truth. But as I sat in my living room, listening to my music, reading and thinking about the historical roots of painting, music, and poetry, I began to wonder whether, and if so, in what ways, the art I love carries glimmers of the meanings to me like that of the earliest of all our arts had to those who created them and to those who lived amid them. The arts began as manifestations of religious beliefs and hopes, including drama, which is, as is mentioned in the excerpt from Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, in which he explains that secular drama, plays, the stuff we go see when we go down to New York, grew directly from religious rituals. Is that what my artworks do for me? Does the art on our walls and on our records and in my books connect me with the divine or with my version of the divine? Or, more specifically, were Jackson Pollock and Emily Dickinson and Sergei Rachmaninoff, Robert Frost and Andy Warhol and Philip Glass channeling whatever they conceived of as their gods, or anything like what we would accept as something spiritual? Or, for that matter, were local artists, Vermont artists, Gary Milek and Robert O'Brien, who painted 2 of the landscapes on our wall? Or was our California friend Phyllis Lachey, who painted the abstract Almost Horizons? Or our old Virginia friend Joel, who crafted the 2 raku vases in which we want our ashes to be put after we're cremated, were they channeling what could be conceived of as the spiritual, as the divine? All of these works of art, we believe, are beautiful, just as Gordon Child's artist magicians and the Greek sculptor Praxiteles and the anonymous architects who designed the cathedral at Chartres would have believed their creations were beautiful. If they weren't, how could they possibly have been expected? How could they possibly have expected the gods or spirits or whatever the artists were trying to connect with to be pleased? Was Beethoven reaching out to the spiritual world? If we accept Su-Yung Lee's analysis, the answer is yes, especially in regard to his Opus 111, about which Amy Clampett's poem, from which I read earlier, connects with her father's life and searches. Asking the same question of the apparent epitome of aesthetic secularism, Jackson Pollock, Lexi Eichelblum writes in an essay called God's Back, Jackson Pollock and the Beatific Vision, that, quote, a significant dimension of art's purpose is to provide a unique sort of knowledge. One might call it an experiential sort of knowledge about a fundamental aspect of the human condition. One of the ways that art accomplishes this is by opening a more immediate encounter with reality than is possible in day-to-day life. The age-old association of art with religion, either in terms of cooperation or displacement, is in part due to its capacity to confront us with reality in more fundamental terms. Life, death, time, space, human, divine, than our natural interests typically allow. She goes on writing that Pollock's so-called drip paintings do just this, as Eichelblum writes, explaining that the Renaissance effort to use technique to make things clear and realistic is undone after the late 19th century, when, quote, painters begin to challenge the assumption that a spectator's visual expectations should determine the picture plane. A painting instead becomes an opportunity to experience vision itself differently. This is, in a sense, not unlike the early Greek dramatists who didn't even portray Dionysus in the production, or the Old Testament gods appearing in Exodus not as a person, but as a burning bush. Responding to Moses' question about what he should tell his people about their God, that he should only say, I am that I am. Enigmas. Gods are, by and large, enigmas. This is why one assumes both Judaism and Islam forbade their followers to make images of them. It's why what most gods do and require of their worshipers most of the time doesn't make what would seem to be much sense. Whether it's sacrificing virgins or precious sheep, demanding that people abstain from eating this or that, or marrying this or that kind of person, or fasting, eating anything at all. Whether it's praying to Zeus that we, being honored, may honor thy name with the music of hymns, or to the Assyrian Marduk that hear my cry and pronounce judgment. None of it, outside of the context of the entire religion, makes sense. It's all just what one is supposed to do or say. Why? Because the God would say, I told you so. All this reminds me of a few of my favorite poems. Some time ago, I decided to try to read Wallace Stevens seriously. I had found him too difficult, but I decided that he'd be worth a try. One of the first poems I read in the tattered little paperback I'd been carrying around for some time is called Man Carrying Thing. It begins, "The poem must resist the intelligence almost successfully." It concludes, "We must endure our thoughts all night until the bright obvious stands motionless in cold." What is this but to face a burning bush that tells us that it is our God? What is it but being asked to recite a prayer again and again just because a God told us to recite it again and again? Or to kill a sheep because those who know what God wants have told us to kill a sheep? And then there's Charles Wright's poem, Lost Language, which concludes, "I have a thirst for the divine, a long drink of forbidden water. I have a hankering for the dust light, for things illegible. I want to settle myself where the river falls on hard rocks, where no one can cross, where the star-shadowed, star-colored city lies just out of reach. Just out of reach. That thing we want so badly, just out of reach." Sometimes it's what the God is in charge of, whether he or she will which he or she might dole out if we can just find the right words. But sometimes it's just the God, the Spirit, the divine that we're reaching for, just to feel that there's something more to life than rivers and hard rocks, poems and symphonies, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, a good friend, a nice walk. Sometimes we just have a hankering for the divine. I had been searching for something I had written about music that I'd come across a few days before when I was going through the stacks of journals and poems that I'd written over the decades. I went back to my search as I reached this point in my sermon. I found it. I had begun a poem that I'd written on March 26th, 2000. It's rare that I actually date them. I began it with these words: "That's why I listen to music, to hear what I can't think." I sort of wonder what I meant when I wrote that. I sort of wonder what it means to me now. I think I meant, and I mean now, that some things are just far beyond the everyday, the familiar, the tangible and touchable, smellable, speakable, beyond what we can put into words. Some things are just out of reach. Some things resist the intelligence almost successfully. That is why I think I listen to the same pieces of music again and again, year after year, decade after decade, knowing that I have missed something, am missing something still. It's why I stare at the ballerinas facing pigeon rocks and the watercolor of a house gleaming deep in the jungle that my mother brought back from Vietnam, and the flowers in the small still life we bought in Bellows Falls a few years ago. It's why I read what Charles Wright has to tell me again and again, the same words in the same order on the same pages. Maybe I think without knowing I'm thinking it. Every time I look or listen or read these things, that I'll make contact, make a connection, know something that I didn't know was there to be known, or at least feel something I hadn't felt. Art and religion Both reach for the unknowable. I'm not a religious man in a traditional sense. I don't think a burning bush will have anything to tell me, or that giving up some food for some reason at some time of the year will help me make a connection with whoever or whatever suggested I do it. But still, those paintings still beckon. And the quintets and the poems and the vases that Joel made that will hold our ashes. The painting is by Seurat. It's called Circus. And we'll now take up the offering for the work of the church. And now is the time for joys and concerns. Anyone have either? And I guess, can they send you a joy? Okay, by email? Yes.
Well, this is my first week back in several weeks. And my mother had a series of heart attacks, and I've been driving back and forth with them, and just, it's exhausting. She's okay. She's at home with my brother, and the intensity of what she needs right now is definitely lessened. So she's 97 years old, I have to say, but she gets up every day, and she's very strong, and so I'm just very grateful to be at this point in her journey, and I'm starting to feel a little relieved about where she is. And the other thing is a total joy, which by coincidence just happened to tie in with what you had to say today. I'm going to New York to the Metropolitan Opera on April 7th, which is not this week, but the following week. I'm thrilled. I can't wait. He's one of my favorites. It's Gino Nathan, and I get a lot of comfort from opera because I think these are people who devote their lives to beauty, to the expression of the beauty of human life. And I get a lot of comfort from that, and I'm just overjoyed.
Thank you. Others? Yeah, you've got one.
My joy every week is being here at the Unitarian Church, my new family, my new love of joy of being able to coordinate Zoom, our live podcast around the world. On the podcast alone, through Spotify and Anchor.fm of the Unitarian Church, has already reached 150 views, which means there are people who are listening to our podcast and our church service today and others in the past. My joy is being able to say that I've been blessed by a family in New Bedford that gave me the opportunity to stop being homeless and having a roof over my head. They're just a family I met, a gentleman named Miguel, who gave me an opportunity. But today, I'm blessed because I know that I have a roof over my head and a bed to sleep in, and getting away from homelessness. I have friends who are battling addiction, homelessness, and of course, COVID. I suffered in March 3rd with COVID, but had a heart condition that got me into the hospital. But thank goodness they caught COVID before it got worse. And I was in the ICU for 3 days. But they were able to conquer that and help me with my heart condition. So I feel joy each week coming here and being able to share a little bit of this, and people who are not here with us through Zoom, that maybe having this many people here in the church will bring more people together with us. I always say thank you, Lord, each day for waking up and putting my feet on the floor. I'm living on a double-A battery in my chest. So thank goodness for that ever-ready battery. That little button that keeps going. But I'm blessed each day to be here with you guys here. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, Kit.
So I'd like to say how thrilled I am to see Deborah again. I know that she usually on Zoom, but today she's here in person with us. Thank you for coming in. My pleasure. The other thing I wanted to mention is that one of the things that feeds my spirit as well as art and music is nature.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm dressed in my hiking boots, because that's where I'm going immediately after church services, where we're going to hiking. And so I can't take Deborah back home because I have something else.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Kit.
So I was talking to do the rest. And I'm just struck by some outstanding, is all I can say. I'm thinking of Rudolph Otto, the idea of the holy and straight notes and also Walter T. Stace.
No, huh?
It's about $1,000 a book. That was raised on that. I think it might have to be further. Well, unfortunately, someone else thought it was worth $1,000.
Oh, no. Other joys or concerns? Yes, sir.
Maybe a stretch to talk about art and male bonding beyond with the same sentence. Are a couple of things coming up, it seems. A friend called a week or two ago asking if we could maybe put together some sort of a Ukraine relief concert. And I'm talking to folks at the First Parish in Bridgewater about when they're trying to come up with a policy for doing a performance. And so hopefully we'll do that this week. I'm possibly in the middle of May for doing that. The other thing is that we actually heard that on July 7th, we've got a date to perform a music alley in Bridgewater, which is an outdoor venue. So we and several friends will probably be there. So we'll be hearing more about all this.
Thank you. Well, before we sing hymn number 298, I'd remind you of all the joys and all the many, many concerns floating around the world at the moment. And can we sing, I think I got this one right, hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses. As I extinguish the chalice, I leave you with the words you said not long ago. Simple words. It is possible to live in peace.